The idea of tonight's seminar, really is born out of really what's been going on in the Jewish world, specifically in Israel, over the last year or so. We've had this eruption of terrorism, and for those of us that know, we read the headlines, you see the news, we know what's going on, stabbings and cars smashing into bus stops, and just the upstart of terrorism again all over in Israel. And I think for all of us, we look at it and we say, here we go again. We had it last year, 2 years ago, with the war in the South. Before that, we had it with the bus bombings. And the older you are and the longer you've been paying attention to the news, the more you realize this is just the same thing over and over. It's not news that Palestinians are inflicting terrorism on us. It's been going on for a long, long time, going back to the 20s, really. But I think what's facing Am Yisrael right now, what's facing the Jewish people, is maybe this frustration of, is it ever really going to end? Is there any real solution to the problem? So it's been troubling me, right? I have 6 kids. They travel on the buses in Israel. They're at the bus stops. They're at the train stations. We live in the country. We face it every day. And the thing that troubled me more was the prospect that not just my kids, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, another war, another attack, another wave of terrorism. Like, when's it ever really going to end? So my thought was to take some time and really try and look more carefully at actual Jewish sources, Torah sources, that talk about the idea of what's going on right now in the Jewish world. I was pretty surprised, quite surprised, to see how much the rabbis from way back when, thousands of years ago, actually foresaw what's going on right now. I want to start, this seminar is going to be in 3 parts essentially. First of all, let's just look at the situation for what it is. Let's understand the current threat that the Jewish people are under. Second step is let's look at the sources and what does Judaism actually say about what's happening now and why it's happening. And step 3 is going to be let's look towards the future, like what can we actually do, possibly, to try and change the situation. So here we go. We're going to have time, by the way, as we go through this, we're going to have time to ask questions. I'm going to have a bit of a discussion as we go through it. So here we go. Section 1, current threats facing Israel and the Jewish people. The most obvious one, the one we're facing day to day, is the terrorism. We see the terrorism on a daily basis. We face it on a daily basis. It's not news to us. And we ask ourselves, with all the talk and all the negotiations and all the different levels and attempts at the peace process through all these years, is there any real solution to terrorism? Palestinians are demanding their own land. They're demanding equal rights. They're demanding sovereignty. We know that we've tried so many attempts over the years, different kinds of governments, from the left and from the right, and we've tried many, many different solutions to the problems. And the question is there any solution that's going to really satisfy the Jewish people and their needs and satisfy the Palestinians and their needs in a way that we can both live together in peace? So I want to try and summarize the idea like this. I think you can summarize it really in quite clear terms, that from our perspective as a Jewish state, there's 3 key ingredients we feel we need to maintain our own state. We need security. We need to maintain that it's a Jewish country, and we'd like it to be a democracy. Those are the 3 pillars, so to speak, of the founding of the state of Israel. We want a secure, Jewish, democratic state. From the very beginning, that was Ben-Gurion, that's been every right-wing and left-wing government throughout the generations, has wanted those 3 elements. And now we look and we say, okay, what are the possible solutions? What are possible ways of dealing with the Palestinian claims and what their needs are, what their desire is, what their claim is? Can we have a way of addressing their needs and satisfying them in a way that doesn't compromise on the 3 things that we're looking for? So attempt number 1, the most obvious chant that's being promoted in the peace camps, is land for peace. Land for peace. Give the Palestinians land, withdraw, give them their own sovereign state, give them their own independence, give them their own arms, give them their own military, and that should solve the problem. So we've had this idea called withdrawal, a 2-state solution. It's not a theory, it's an actuality. We tried it in the Gaza Strip. We disengaged in 2005. We gave the Gaza Strip over to the Palestinian Authority. Within 2 years, it was turned over to the radical terrorist group Hamas, as we know. Fighting breaks out. Since then, Hamas has fired over 11,000 missiles on Israel. And we're at a point now where we are threatened daily on all of our borders from the militants. So when Ariel Sharon had this crazy idea, let's actually do land for peace, let's actually disengage, uproot 20,000 Jewish settlers from Gaza, give the land to the Palestinian Authority as an attempt to try this model called land for peace. We tried it. What do we end up with? We end up with 11,000 missiles. We end up living in a country where every 2 years they rearm and they attack us. We live in a country where we put up a wall, they start digging tunnels. We live in a country where the more we try the solution of land for peace, the more we see it doesn't work. Gaza was a minor experiment in it, and it's been a complete failure. The idea of trying it in Judea and Samaria, the idea of giving back huge sections of land that could be turned over to radical groups that are right on the border of Jerusalem, that are within missile range of most of the rest of the country, is crazy. So I don't think you'll find any serious opinion today in Israel, in the political spectrum of Israel, that says land for peace is a viable solution. We've tried it, it doesn't seem to work. Yeah?
I'm wondering what happened in 2013 that there were only 41 lawsuits?
So because that was right after Operation Cast Lead. They launched a war, we fought back, and since then things have been relatively quiet. But it comes and goes in waves. You can see it comes and goes in waves, right? It gets to a point where we can't take it. We go in and invade. We end up having to kill thousands of Palestinians that are launching missiles from hospitals and from schoolyards. And they calm down, they get quiet, and then they start up again, make things worse again. It's just a cycle that keeps continuing, back and forth. So option number one, and again, this is sort of just simple seeing the idea in simple terms. Option number one, the idea of withdrawal, is a nice idea, but what does it do? It really compromises our security. We can't have a secure country with secure borders if we're going to give land to Palestinians, even to the Palestinian Authority, which is considered moderate, if at the same time there are radical groups like ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah that are going to take it over and become a serious, credible threat to our survival. So withdrawal compromises on our security. Option number two. Option number two is let's annex the land. Forget about giving the West Bank to the Palestinians. Let's actually take over the land, annex it, make it part of Israel proper, the way Israel did with Jerusalem when we won the war in 1967, the way we did in the Golan and annexed and made the Golan part of Israel proper in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War. Let's annex the West Bank, let's annex Judea and Samaria, let's include all of that territory as part of Israel proper, and the Palestinians will become Israeli citizens. That sounds like a good option, theoretically. Palestinians living in Israel have a much higher standard of living than the Palestinians that are living in the territories. If we make it Israel proper and we give them all the social services and all the humanitarian benefits that every Israeli gets, theoretically that should make the Palestinians happy. What's the difficulty? What's the basic difficulty with giving that, with taking that land, absorbing all the Palestinians and making them Israeli citizens? What's the difficulty?
They can travel wherever they want.
They can travel wherever they want?
They can vote.
What's wrong with them voting?
The demographic problem.
Very good. So if we go with annexation, we basically have a demographic problem. If you look at the idea of us giving back the land, demographically, from 1914 all the way through, generation by generation, if you include the territory of the West Bank, the Palestinians that are living there, and you look at the populations, in 2005, there was slightly less Arabs than Jews. According to the demographic studies done in Israel, by the end of this year, by the end of 2016, if you include all of the land of Israel proper, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, the whole thing, then demographically, you'll have a country with more Palestinians than Jews. You'll have a Jewish state that has a majority Palestinian population, which means you could imagine the idea of having elections, like any democracy has elections, and theoretically, if the Palestinians were unified, they could vote in a Palestinian Arab prime minister as the prime minister of a Jewish state, an Arab defense minister, an Arab foreign minister. We become a minority in our own country. I mean, it sounds crazy. But if we were to absorb the Palestinians and give them equal rights the way they want, at least according to some opinions, it poses a tremendous threat to our security for sure, but it just basically takes away the idea of us having a Jewish state. You can't have a Jewish state with a majority of Palestinian population. See the problem? So a two-state solution threatens our security. A one-state solution threatens our ability to be a Jewish country. There seems to be only one-third possibility, which is the status quo. Maybe the only real solution is not to give them the land It's not to absorb them and make it our land and give them Israeli citizenship. It's just to leave things the way they are now. What's the problem with leaving things the way they are now? What's wrong with maintaining the status quo?
Violence.
The violence, it'll just continue and continue and continue. Nobody's happy with the situation it is right now. In a lot of ways, it threatens our democracy because we're ruling over a foreign, hostile population. We're not giving them rights. We're not letting them into the country. We give them some humanitarian aid. We have to go in and bomb them whenever the trouble starts. Nobody likes the idea of ruling over a population of Palestinians. Nobody thinks it's an ideal. But at the same time, we don't really have much of a choice. We're ruling over a foreign population, ongoing terrorism, worldwide anti-Semitism, growing delegitimization of Israel. I mean, things are just going to get worse and worse as they are, right? You think about it right now. For every time that Hamas, every couple of years, they rearm and they start another war against us. I mean, we've been through this several times already, whether it's Hezbollah or it's Hamas. Either way, when we go through the cycle, what ends up happening? They attack us, we restrain ourselves. They attack more, we can't take it anymore, we go in and invade. We try and invade in the most humanitarian way possible, right? We know the Israelis have a very, very high standard of morality of how we operate when we try and take out missile targets in the territories, in the West Bank and in Gaza, whenever we have to. But at the same time, we know what ends up happening. Thousands of Palestinians end up dying. A few Israelis die, not that many, Baruch Hashem, but whatever, dozens, hundreds sometimes of Israelis die, soldiers, civilians. Many, many, many more Palestinians are dead at the end of every one of those wars. So you'd have to ask the question, what's their tactic? I mean, they've done it over and over and over, and every time they do it, they lose. They walk away bruised and bleeding. And then they rearm and try again 2 years later. I mean, what are they thinking? They think they're actually going to win against the Israeli army? Our multi-billion-dollar military, they're going to beat them with their Scud missiles or their Katyushas or whatever they have? What's their tactic? What's their goal of fighting a war against us when they know that every single time they've done it, they're going to lose? Why do they keep trying anyway?
To get the sympathy?
Exactly. The goal is not a military goal. It's a media goal. It's a goal to get the world aligned against Israel. It's a goal to isolate the world against Israel, and that's what seems to happen each time.
Well, maybe another goal as well, because we could solve the demographic problem maybe if all the North American Jews and all the Jews from all over the world moved to Israel.
Right.
So the fact that they're continuing violence may not win a war, and it does give media sympathy, but it also may discourage Jews from other parts of the world from moving there.
True, which is just another way of isolating Israel or weakening Israel, right? So then the status quo is bad for us because if we just maintain things the way they are, right? We want to maintain our security, maintain it as a Jewish state, keep it as a democracy, but as time goes on, we're getting tired. Jews aren't moving in mass numbers to Israel. It's a scary place to live. There are Israelis leaving all the time. The economy is always in trouble. We don't like being on the front pages of the headlines every time there's a war, and then we end up being the bad guys. Nobody likes the situation the way it is. But for the Palestinians, and certainly for the radical terrorist groups, it plays beautifully into their hands. Again, their goal in launching wars, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah, it's not a military goal. It's a media goal. The goal is to maintain some level of Israel being isolated, Israel losing its economic status, the boycotts, the divestment, the sanctions, the anti-Semitism increases. So the whole thing of the status quo really does play in to just increasing anti-Semitism, right? So in other words, problem number one that we have is just the basic problem of terrorism, and it seems to be a problem that has no solution, a one-state solution, two-state solution, status quo. We're in trouble no matter what we do. But along with that, it leads to this whole other problem called anti-Semitism. We see it all the time. Today, you read the headlines that talk about the poor Palestinians that die while they're attacking Israeli soldiers. We know it. We see the media coverage. We know how horrible it is. So when we look at it, I think for us who know better, we're pretty disgusted by it. We see the editorials. We see the cartoons in the papers. This is an editorial that talks about Netanyahu and the Israelis being involved in Paris in the attacks that took place with ISIS not long ago. Basically, all of these are cartoons we're pretty familiar with, comparing Jews to Nazis, comparing Israeli soldiers to the German army, all the Holocaust imagery. You know, it's hard to look at these things and think of it as anti-Zionism. It's pretty clearly anti-Semitism. And as time goes on, and we try and defend ourselves, we try and maintain a high standard of morality, no matter what we try to do, no matter how hard we try to get the world to like us and understand where we're coming from. Every Israeli spokesman gets on CNN and says, what would you do if you were in our shoes? We're doing the best we can. You would do no different. As a matter of fact, when America does go into Afghanistan or Russia does go, they're much worse when it comes to the crimes against humanity that any Israeli's ever been accused of. But you don't find these kinds of pictures about Americans and Russians. You find it about Jews. This is the stuff we're familiar with. The fact that there's always a level of anti-Semitism in the media, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism in the media, that's not news to us. We've been seeing this for a long time. To me, what's interesting is it's reached a level today where it's so perverse, it's so beyond anything you can imagine, that we just look at it and say, like, how in the world do we think we can fight this?
We're here on campus at the University of California at Berkeley to find out how offensive students find the ISIS flag.
ISIS is misunderstood. We just want our own state. Why does America keep bombing us? America and Western imperialism are to blame, not ISIS. We just want a state of our own, an Islamic state, no different than America. We do not want to hurt anybody else. We don't have to hurt them. Why is America killing us? They're killing innocent civilians. America is causing the death in Iraq and in Syria. America is to blame for the deaths in Syria, not ISIS, not Islamic State.
Good luck.
Thank you, sir. The blood of the Middle East is on the hands of America. American imperialism is responsible for death all around the world. Right? That's right. We are ISIS. We are love. We don't want to harm anybody. We're forced to by American imperialism and American laws. Right? Right on.
Can't smoke on campus. They're going to cite you.
Oh, all right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Then again, tolerance has always been an important value at Berkeley.
Israel's a thief in the night.
Israel's what?
Thief in the night.
I don't even know what that means, sir.
Thief in the day.
And what's Hamas is a great place, right? Israel protects Palestinian human rights. Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Israel protects. Only Hamas is responsible. Right? You agree with that?
No, not really.
You don't agree with that? You don't agree that Hamas is a terrorist organization? Is Hamas a terrorist organization? Excuse me? That's the way you respond? I can't hear what you're saying.
All of Israel killer.
All of Israel are killers and Hamas are not killers?
No.
Tyranny isn't cute.
What? Isn't it cute? Right, tyranny's not cute. Hamas is not cute.
That flag you wave is the psychological genocide of this planet.
Killing kids.
I'm sick? Hamas is a terrorist organization. Do you not agree with that, sir?
Whatever. Yeah, free Palestine from Israel, dude.
This institution is part of the people who enslaved the whole planet.
Haiti experienced an earthquake a number of years ago. The Israelis decided, here's our chance. We're going to show the world that we're the good guys. We're going to go in. We have no real diplomatic relations with Haiti. We have no political interest in Haiti. We're going to go purely in the name of humanitarian aid to save Haitians from their earthquake. Now, Israel doesn't have the best economy. We have our own problems. We have hardly enough money for our own care of our own people. But we're going to go out of our way, say the Israelis, and show the world that we're willing to help humanity when we see humanity in trouble. So Israel sends a field hospital to Haiti. We save hundreds of patients, surgeries, babies delivered. We're set up one of the first field hospitals in the area. Many countries followed suit, but we were really one of the first ones on the ground. And you would think, great, now the world's going to see who we are. We're the good guys. We're not the bad guys. There's no Arab country that did send aid. The Israelis sent aid. So what comes out in the headlines? That the Deputy British Minister of Health accused Israel of going to Haiti to harvest organs. This isn't an anti-Semitic publication. This is the Deputy Health Minister of England. Why did the Israelis go to Haiti? We went to harvest organs from babies, right? The blood-sucking Jews are at it again. They think they're trying to show the world that they're nice guys. They're the bad guys. I'll give you another example, again, just to show how perverse it is. How perverse it is. The Israeli soldiers were accused of raping Palestinians in the territories, right? We're an occupying force, we're dominating over this poor population. Israeli soldiers are routinely accused of raping Palestinian women. So an independent inquiry was done, not by the Israelis, to examine the incidence of rape in the territories. And the story came out and showed that the incidence of Israeli sexual violence compared to any other occupying force in the world, the Americans in Iraq, the Americans in Afghanistan, Russians, anywhere in the world where there's an occupying force, is much worse incidence of sexual violence.
Much less.
I think the other examples are much worse than it is with the Israelis in the territories. So what do Israelis do? We go on campus, we go around explaining our case, and the headlines in the campus paper says, ex-Israeli soldier denounced on U.S. campus for not raping Palestinian women. What? We're being denounced for not raping. So I read this, I'm like, what? I just don't understand. What's the subheadline? Subtitle says, you IDF soldiers don't rape Palestinians because Israelis are so racist and disgusted by them that you won't touch them. So it's like, there's no way to win this one. Would you be happier if we raped them? Would that make you feel better? We're not being racist? We equally rape Jews and Arabs? You realize this is a no-win situation. If we rape them, we're the bad guys. If we don't rape them, we're the bad guys. We send a field hospital to Haiti, we're the bad guys because we're harvesting organs. You realize no matter what we do, no matter how far we bend over backwards to try and prove the case that we're not who they think we are. We're the good guys. We're humanitarian. We have Western values. No matter what we do, it seems to be a lose-lose situation. So again, back to really the whole paradigm over here. Terrorism seems to be a no-win situation because we have no way of dealing with the Palestinians that's going to satisfy them. Anti-Semitism in the media seems to be a no-win situation. It's a lose-lose situation because no matter what we do, we're going to look like the bad guys. Let's take it a step further and look at another problem we have today, aside from the terrorism, aside from the anti-Semitism, which is nuclear Iran. We're all aware of the issue. We all know what's going on. We're all aware of the deal that was made recently. So if we're just sort of collecting for ourselves and seeing what are the problems we're facing, we have terrorism, we have anti-Semitism. This is lose-lose. This right now seems to be lose-lose. And nuclear Iran, as you can imagine, as I'm sure we know, is also lose-lose. We're in a situation right now that's not about media, and it's not about military, and it's not about another war. It's about a direct existential threat to the existence of the state of Israel.
Poses a threat to countries across the region. One nation has been singled out above the rest.
اسرائیل یک قده سرطانی است. خب قده سرطانی رو چیکار میکنن؟ غیر از قطع قده چه علاجی میتوان برای او کرد؟
Taking aim once again at Israel, Ahmadinejad told an audience that, quote, this origin of corruption will soon be wiped off the earth's face.
You have a president of Iran that threatens to wipe a democracy and one of America's strongest allies on the planet, wipe it from the map. Now, if that isn't a wake-up call to the rest of the world, I don't know what is.
Whenever Iran has developed a new weapon that can be used against Israel, they've shipped it to Hezbollah. Now, those missiles give Iran, through Hezbollah, the capability of hitting any target in Israel and hitting it with a very large warhead.
Once the Iranian missiles are up and running on launching pads in Lebanon, they can reach not just Israel, they can reach Western targets. So we are talking about an expansion of Iran in the entire Eastern Mediterranean region, something that has not happened even during the Cold War under the Soviet threat.
In 1998, the Iranians carried out a test to launch a Scud missile from a barge in the Caspian Sea. Many people believe that this is what the Iranians would like to do with the United States, put a missile in a cargo ship going off of our coast and attack Baltimore, attack New York, attack Washington, D.C. From 100 miles off our coast, would never see it.
You can put it on a ship, and you can sail that ship into New York Harbor and blow it up. You have no real way of stopping that, because how do you know which of the thousands of ships that move around has that device on it?
95% of U.S. trade is handled at ports similar to this one on New York's Staten Island. But only 5% of these containers are visually inspected.
They could use such a weapon in some covert way, say on a Hezbollah crewed fishing boat in some port somewhere in the world.
Another scenario, clearly, is to bring a small, man-portable nuclear weapon, a backpack nuclear weapon, across the Mexican border, which is, most Americans understand, is not very well protected.
Hezbollah has been making linkages with Mexican drug cartels, not to compete with them in narcotics trade, but rather to use their already established channels of entry into the United States, up from Mexico, through the United States, and all the way on up even into Canada.
The terrorist organization Hezbollah has been using Mexican drug smuggling routes to enter the U.S.
Correct. It is the same Hezbollah that is funded by Iran. These are wings of Hezbollah criminal enterprises working in Latin America. They can certainly sneak over radioactive material. They can sneak over people. It's just that easy.
No question that identifying and tracking Hezbollah here inside the United States is a very high priority of the FBI.
Tomorrow, you could have Hezbollah attacking the United States in the United States. If Iran has nuclear weapons, do you see the President of the United States calling up in Tehran and saying, "You've just attacked us, we're going to launch a counterstrike on your territory"? I can hear Ahmadinejad or another Iranian president saying, "Well, Mr. President, make my day."
The United States is extremely vulnerable. We're an open society. We're spread out. We have harbors, we have two coasts, we have rivers. And we are susceptible to a deadly attack, either by terrorists with a nuclear weapon provided by Iran, or by some delivery system they manage to cobble together, whether it's conventional or EMP or whatever it is.
When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad talks about a world without America not only being desirable but achievable, he could mean probably one thing, and that is what's known as a strategic electromagnetic pulse attack.
An electromagnetic pulse weapon is essentially a nuclear weapon that is exploded in the atmosphere up above. It doesn't hit the ground, it's exploded up in the air. It sends out pulse waves, shock waves.
You have to understand what this pulse is. It's tremendously high energy. Every wire will pick up this pulse, take the energy, and burn out whatever's at the end.
An EMP weapon, meaning a small nuclear bomb, detonated above the center of the United States would literally take down the entire power grid of this country.
Not only would the power grid be out, it would be out for probably months, but every piece of electronics that we use, from pacemakers to phones to cars to gasoline pumps to water pumps, would all be fried.
The Blue Ribbon Commission established by the Congress concluded that this was an eminently achievable way of effecting catastrophic effects on the United States, specifically devastating the electrical grid of this country, and with it all of the infrastructures that depend upon it: food, water, sewage, medical, commercial, financial, transportation. According to the chairman of this Blue Ribbon Commission, within a year, 9 out of 10 Americans would be dead as a result of exposure, starvation, disease.
This country would cease to exist as we know it.
When you combine that with the stated purpose of bringing about a world without America.
We've had since that time a deal signed between Obama and the Iranian administration. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action includes a 24-day approval process where, when Iranians are asked to have a visitation, where we want to go in and inspect their sites, we have to wait 24 days before we're actually able to go in and inspect their sites. The minute they start holding by their end of the agreement, which they already have, they have $150 billion in frozen assets released that they can then use to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, terrorism around the world. And within 15 years, they then have international sanction, international agreement that they are allowed to build unrestricted whatever nuclear materials, whatever nuclear weaponry they want to. So yes, it's a Jewish problem, and yes, it's an Israel problem, but it's clearly much more than that. It's clearly a global problem. So let's then take it one last step. We're going to look at one fourth category, which is really the global threat. And I want to sort of put it all together for us. We have the terrorism, which seems to be out of control, something we have no way of really stopping. We have the anti-Semitism, which is on the rise. Nuclear Iran seems to be lose-lose for us as well. And finally, we have the global threat. The global threat meaning, if you read the headlines of what's going on today, the mass influx of hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees going into Europe, taking over democracies, countries that are slowly shifting demographically to becoming Muslim majority countries, in France, in the Netherlands, in England, all over Europe. So the threat is, again, not just Jewish and not just Israeli. There seems to be this wave, and I think we're sensing it, this wave of Islam, and certainly a lot of radical Islam, really in a lot of ways becoming a dominating force within the world. You know, the rabbis talk about the Jewish people being one sheep surrounded by 70 wolves, and it's a very startling image. But when you look at what's going on in the world right now, it's clear that we're heading towards that. Between these four categories, it's clear that we're heading towards that. So I want to show one last quick video that describes the global threat of the rise of radical Islam. And that'll be the end of section 1. I want to discuss for a few minutes, just like, where does this leave us?
I and thousands like me have forsaken everything for what we believe. We are at war and I'm a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
We are living with them. They are here. They're not outside our borders, they are here.
So when you ask, is radical Islam a threat to Europe? Of course it is, because you find this large and growing minority population that is growing more and more radical and rejects more and more blatantly, overtly, and stridently the societies in which they operate.
They are using our laws against us. They are using our democracy against us. And they know it. They know exactly what they're doing.
When you think just from a military perspective, forgetting everything else, the September 11th hijackers trained for their mission to attack the United States inside the United States of America. That is something unbelievable. Here these 19 Arab Islamic fundamentalists come to the United States, dress like Americans, get American driver's license, register in American flight schools, and in American flight schools they learn how to destroy the World Trade Center with American jetliners. That is an unbelievable thing. That means that you don't need necessarily to have geographical territory at your disposal, because you can use the geography, use the territory of your enemies in order to destroy your enemies. That is the most postmodern type of warfare we've ever seen.
It is the first war where no state is in war. It is a transnational war with transnational actors that is spread across beyond state and cannot be controlled by state. In fact, they can themselves infiltrate states, influence states, but they are not state actors. That is what makes this war far more difficult to execute.
I think the world, despite the number of attacks on various countries, is still in denial. They don't want to believe that someone has declared war on them.
In the 1930s, the danger of Nazism was there. It was in everything Hitler wrote and said, in everything the Nazi authorities did.
Dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
In the corruption of a whole generation of German youth through the propaganda of Nazism in schools. But people thought, well, this is a German problem, it's a limited problem. We have our own problems, we have our unemployment. And I think the same is true today. They don't connect the dots. They don't connect the acts together. They don't see that Islamic fundamentalism is a global network and a global problem.
There is no terrorist threat. There is no terrorist threat. Yes, there have been horrific acts of terrorism. And yes, there will be acts of terrorism again. But that does not mean that there's some massive terrorist threat.
We have to worry about terrorism. If terrorism had struck on the West Coast rather than the East Coast, some of the folks in Hollywood might have a somewhat different view.
People don't want to feel that this is part of a single threat. Because if you come to that conclusion, and I'm sure it's the true conclusion, then you have to do something about it.
If you ignore a real threat, like has happened in the past before World War II, then the world will pay with many, many millions of dead.
In Second World War, the West was sleeping. The Munich Accords came regarding what should we do about this Adolf Hitler who wants to take over Czechoslovakia. So what did the parliament do in Great Britain? They got together and they said, well, we need to give Hitler land for peace.
In return for Hitler's guarantee of world peace, Chamberlain and Daladier prevailed upon Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland without a fight. In Britain, a happy Chamberlain came back declaring he had achieved peace, peace in our time. One of the most tragic and ironic scenes in all history.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
Chamberlain believed that they could do a deal with Hitler, that Britain and Germany had a special affinity.
We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Winston Churchill had warned his country and his government that they were pursuing a disastrous course with regard to appeasing Germany.
These gangs of bandits have sought to darken the light of the world, have sought to stand between the common people of all the lands and their march forward into their inheritance.
Peace. It wasn't peace. By taking the Sudetenland, they had made Czechoslovakia defenseless, a ripe plum ready to fall into Hitler's lap. Within 6 months of declaring that he wanted no more territory anywhere, he violated the Munich Agreement. Austria and Czechoslovakia were gone without a fight, and Hitler was getting his control of Eastern Europe. Poland was next on the map.
Churchill never considered himself a great leader. He always considered that he had failed, because from 1933 to 1939, he had warned his country and his government. So when war came, and when in May 1940 he was asked to be Prime Minister, he felt he was only there because he had failed. That if he had been listened to, if the country had understood the German danger, if the country had allied with other states threatened by Germany, then this situation would never have come to pass. That Hitler could have been deterred. Perhaps it could have been stopped. Perhaps millions of lives could have been saved.
Today, the press, by minimizing the potential threats, by ignoring the potential threats, are doing a tremendous disservice to the West by not alarming the people to what they should be alarmed about.
When you ignore what people are saying, when they're actively on a daily basis calling for your own annihilation, calling for the annihilation of your country, you're ignoring them at your own risk.
The same thing is happening now again. History is repeating itself.
I was a very intense believer in the Nazi ideology. And I know what a supreme dedication to an ideology can do.
From an early age, Alphonse Heck was influenced by the Nazi worldview. He joined the Hitler Youth at the age of 10, and by the end of World War II, he was a high-ranking officer of the Hitler Youth.
It is absolutely correct to say if you can't learn from the events of Nazi Germany, you will not be able to grasp the true intent of the danger of the radical Muslim world today. You're simply hiding.
History has an unfortunate habit of always repeating itself.
The idea that the radical Muslims have and that Nazis had is they demonize the Jews. You know, they just turn them into demons. And I mean, this is exactly what happened in Germany. Now, can you imagine? We were enlightened people and we fell for this. Why wouldn't Muslims fall for this?
فاليهود هم اليهود، هؤلاء هم الذين يجب أن يذبحوا ويجب أن يقتلوا. لمن وضع حزاما ناسفا على نفسه أو على أبنائه ودخل في أعماق اليهود وقال الله أكبر ولله الحمد لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
They are killing the infidels just like the preacher in the mosque told them to do. It's their duty to kill them.
When you look at these four fronts that we're facing, I'm suggesting that right now, it seems, on all four fronts, it's lose-lose. I don't see any solutions on the horizon politically, militarily, socially, on any of these areas. I think the good news, we're going to get to in a second, the good news is that if we can take a step back and look from a Torah perspective, it's really not that surprising that we are in the state we are right now. And when you begin to see, as we're going to see in a few minutes, sort of the script of Jewish history with where we're at right now, things begin to make a little bit more sense. I look at this and say, this is all kind of irrational. Like, it's bewildering. Like why would they give Iran the bomb? And why aren't they stopping the terrorism? And don't they see how it's intransigent? And why is the anti-Semitism so out of control? Why the Israeli flag and not the ISIS flag? We look at it and say, like, it just doesn't make any sense. It just seems so perverse that it's going in such a direction. Probably the most basic idea that we should start thinking about is this. Clearly in the Torah it says the following idea. God will return you from your captivity and have compassion on you. He will return and gather you from among the nations. And God will bring you to the land that your forefathers inherited. You will acquire it. He will make you even more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. The basic prediction of the Jewish people in the end of days coming back and rebuilding the state of Israel. I mean, we are living in miraculous times. 200 years ago, I don't think any of our great-great-grandparents could have imagined that we'd be living in a world today where you can get on a plane and go to a country that has an Israeli army and an Israeli government and a Jewish state and thousands of schools and yeshivas and kollels and state schooling, and we have a prosperous, thriving Jewish country that we didn't have for 2,000 years. I mean, we really are living in a very, very unique point in Jewish history. For 2,000 years, okay, anti-Semitism, yeah, that's what it is. It's called galut, it's called diaspora, it's called Esav Soneh et Yaakov. The world always hates us, that's not news to us. But we accomplished a miracle less than 70 years ago when the Jewish people picked up and refounded themselves in the state of Israel. We are living in a very unique time in Jewish history. Take it a step further. The book of Ezekiel says But you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and bear your fruit for my people Israel, for the return is close at hand. And ye shall be tilled and sown. I will multiply men upon you, and the city shall be inhabited, and the waste places shall be built. Yechezkel the prophet says, when the Jewish people come back to the land, we're going to see the land begin to flourish. You're going to shoot forth your branches, bear your fruit. We're going to see things happening that tells us we're in a unique time. The Marsha, one of the commentaries, says, as long as Israel does not dwell on its land, the land does not give her fruits as she is accustomed. When she will begin to flourish, however, right, when we see the land flourishing and give of her fruits, this is the clear sign that the end, the time of redemption, is approaching, when all of Israel will return to their land. Whoa. Not just the Jewish people came back to the land and that's a fulfillment of a prophecy, but there's something more going on. This is not another return to the land. We've had returns. We came back after to rebuild the second temple. We came back, but this is our third time coming back. But the Marsha is saying, and he wrote this 500 years ago, the Marsha is saying, when you see the Jewish people come back to the land, and you see the land begin to flourish, we're exporting fruits and vegetables all around the world, at least for places who still want to take our fruits and vegetables, right? We're flourishing economically. We're an economic superpower, the startup economy. We're doing amazing things in this country, in that country where I live now. It's a sign, it's a clear sign that the end, the time of redemption is coming. We're really around the corner from it. The Zohar makes it more interesting. In those days, Bnei Yishmael will stir up all the other nations to come upon Jerusalem. As it says, I, God, will gather all the nations to Jerusalem for the war, Zechariah. The nations will all gather, make a pact among themselves, and try to wipe out Israel, who created their own government. It will be a time of trouble for the children of Jacob, but it won't lead to their downfall. Rather, it will lead to their salvation. The Zohar was written thousands of years ago. And the Zohar is saying, at this time when the Jewish people come back to the end, come back to the land for the end of days, who's going to be there leading a charge of anti-Semitism against us? It's going to be Bnei Yishmael. The Arab nations are going to be there. I don't think, again, 200 years ago, the Arabs were a very disparate, nomadic desert group of tribes. The idea of an Arab superpower, the idea of a coalition of Arab governments having huge amounts of power and huge amounts of following didn't exist even 200 years ago. But at the end of days, Jewish people are going to come back, Bnei Yishmael are going to be there, and that's where the clash is going to happen, and we're not going to lose. We're not going to lose. Zechariah. This will be the plague with which God will strike all the nations that have organized against Jerusalem. How's he going to take care of our enemies? Each one's flesh will melt away while he is standing on his feet. Each one's eyes will melt away in their sockets. What does that sound like to you?
Nuclear.
Sounds kind of nuclear. People's flesh will melt off of them while they're standing? I mean, did Zechariah know about nuclear fission? Nuclear war? I mean, who could have known about these things? We're talking about a prophecy from 2,000 years ago. But that's the plague that's going to happen. Goes on, even more to make it more clear. 1 second, here we are. Rabbi Moshe Sternbach, who's a rabbi alive in Jerusalem today, says we have a tradition from the Vilna Gaon that the war of Gog and Magog, this final war, will last 12 minutes. 1/3 of the world will die, 1/3 will suffer from plague, and 1/3 will survive. The Vilna Gaon lived 200 years ago. He's telling us that this final war is going to be a war that lasts 12 minutes. Would that not have sounded crazy until the invention of nuclear war? I mean, in the days of the Vilna Gaon, how did they kill people? With a gun, it takes 12 minutes to put together a pack of gunpowder and put it into the gun and take one shot with one bullet. The world, 1/3 of it's going to die in 12 minutes? That could only happen today. That could only happen in a world where you have nuclear energy. And that's clearly what's going on. That's exactly what Iran is planning on launching. That's exactly what this whole debate about Iran is about. It's about a nuclear threat. And that's the threat that we have clear commentary saying that we're facing. The Talmud tells an interesting story. I remember learning this in Yeshiva many years ago. A story in the Talmud, it made no sense to me when I read it. The story goes like this. It says, Rabbi Bar Chana said, once while on a ship, this is like an analogy, a metaphor, a midrash. Once while on a ship, we came to a gigantic fish at rest, which we supposed to be an island, since there was sand on its back, in which grass was growing. We therefore landed, made a fire, and cooked our meal. But when the fish felt the heat, he rolled over, and we would have drowned had not the ship been near. Very odd sounding. I remember learning this about 15 years ago in yeshiva, like, what some crazy medrash. I don't know what the heck it's talking about. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I recently found a commentary from 300 years ago that describes that this is what the story really is. Rabbi Bar Chana saw with divine inspiration that in the end of days, the Jewish nation will have domination over another people. They will think that this people has no hope of overpowering Israel. So Israel will rule over them. But when these people are provoked, they will upend everything and fight Israel. And were it not for Mashiach being close at hand, the Jewish people would drown from the troubles. You have all the Zohar, Rabbi Yaakov Loberbaum, all of these sources saying that this is exactly what's supposed to be happening in this time period that we're in right now. It's supposed to be the Arabs against the Jews. It's supposed to be the Jewish people in the state of Israel. It's supposed to be nuclear. We're going to win. This is right around the corner from Mashiach coming. We're at a very, very unique time in Jewish history. We're right towards the end. It's not about Edom. It's not about Esav. It's not about anybody else. It's the Jewish people and the Arabs fighting, and it's exactly at a time where there's some nuclear aspect to it that seems to be what's really driving it. So in some ways, we can almost look, it's like we're opening up the book, the Zohar, the Talmud, these rabbis, and we're reading it and saying, this is a script. We're actually, this is supposed to happen. This is exactly what's supposed to happen in Jewish history. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't about Obama. This isn't about Ahmadinejad. This isn't about Hitler. This isn't about some crazy Arab terrorist. This is exactly how history is supposed to play. And we will win in the end. The Jewish people are going to survive. We have a promise from all these sources to talk about it. The question is, where do we fit into it? The question is this. When we face threats in Jewish history, you always have to take a step back and say, exactly what is it that God is sending us that we have to now use to figure out what our response is supposed to be? Right? We're coming up to Purim in a couple of weeks. So somehow, when the threat of genocide came to the Jewish people in the story of Purim, Mordechai was able to step back and say, you know what it is? We have to regather ourselves, Lechnos and Kol Yehudim, get together, we have to do tshuva, we have to fast for 3 days, we have to pray, we have to get all the school kids to fast. That was the response. Mordechai knew somehow that's what needed to be done. That's the response we need to the Haman who's trying to kill us. In the story of Hanukkah, it was completely different. You have a Greek empire trying to dominate us. What does Yehuda HaMaccabi say? He doesn't say it's time to do tshuva, or time to pray, or time to put on tefillin, or time to keep kosher. No, we got to get up and fight. It's about a fight. We have to trust in God, the few against the many. We have to take up our fight, take up our swords, and fight and beat off the empires. So somehow, we have to figure out, given the threat that we're under, right? Right now, it's an Arab threat. It's an existential threat. It's a nuclear threat. It's an internal threat. It threats from many sides. What's really the message behind it? What are we supposed to be doing about it? Talmud says, in quite clear terms, if a person wants to be saved from the birth pangs of Mashiach, they should occupy themselves with Torah and acts of kindness. Right? This is not a Purim story. This is not a Hanukkah story. This is a unique time. It's times of Mashiach. It's nuclear. It's Arabs. It's the state of Israel. It's Messianic era. We're in it right now. We're heading towards it. And the rabbis seem to be saying there's two things we need to do: Torah and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah and acts of kindness. But what does that really mean? They're both kind of vague ideas. It's kind of hard to imagine with all the terrorism going on and the threat from Iran that if we just sit down and learn Torah, or we're just really nice to each other and help each other, that somehow that's going to make all the threats vanish. It's a little hard to imagine. So I think what we have to do is take this idea and maybe think a little more deeply. What does it really mean? What does it mean, Torah? What does it mean, acts of kindness? Why are these the things that the rabbis are saying, the things that we need to be focused on? So there's a tradition we have. I really got this from my own Rebbe, Rav Noach Weinberg, who said there's a concept called measure for measure, midah keneged midah. You see it in the story of Joseph and the brothers. You see it many times. I'll use Joseph and the brothers as an example. Actually, I'll come back to the slide in a second. The story of Joseph and the brothers. They sell off their brother to slavery. They don't know what happens to him. He's been gone a long time. There's a famine in the land of Israel. They have to go down and get some food. So the brothers get together. They go down to Egypt. They want to get some food. They have to meet the viceroy to bargain, get the food. So they're sitting talking to this person. They don't know it's their brother Joseph. And all of a sudden, this person says, you guys are spies. You're trying to take over our land. Who are you anyway? What do you mean you have another brother? I don't believe you. I'm going to jail one of you. You got to prove your point. And these brothers look at each other and say, like, what's going on? We came here to buy food, and we're being accused of wanting to take over the country. Like, what's going on? Why is this happening to us? So what the brothers actually say, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how about Joseph. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. What are the brothers saying? They're saying, you know what's going on here? We are being falsely accused of a crime that we never committed. Why is this happening to us? You know why it's happening to us? Because that's exactly what we did. We falsely accused our brother of a crime he never committed. In other words, mida keneged mida is a rule that applies in Jewish history. And it's a rule that means you have to look at the threat. You have to look at what the nature of the attack is. And because of understanding the nature of the attack, that's how you know how you're supposed to respond. How you respond to Nazis is different than how you respond to Romans. How you respond to Greeks is different than how you respond to Iranians or terrorists. You have to look at the enemy and say, what is it about them? What is it about what they're doing? What is it about what they stand for that's supposed to be teaching us a lesson about what it is that we need to change? So what I'm saying is this. It's an important point here. It's really sort of the crux of my thesis. This is not about saying, well, we have an enemy, let's fight them off, let's get more soldiers, let's make more videos, let's do more nice things in the world, maybe the world will love us. You know, there's always the generic political, social, natural way of responding to threats. You know, you have a headache, you take some medicine. But if you look more deeply, you say, well, why is it happening in this way? What is it about the nature of the threat that we're facing that we're supposed to learn from? What is it that the Arabs have that's making them so strong and so successful that's supposed to be teaching us something about a change that we need to make within ourselves? Try and think about it from that perspective for a minute. What is it about what they have? What is it about what they stand for and what they do that seems to be making them win the game that we're in right now? What do they have? What do they stand for? Who are they that we're supposed to be learning from? Any ideas? Yeah.
A willingness
to hold on a second.
A willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah.
No, I was going to actually, I think we were going to say the same thing. I mean, what we were saying before, what Renata was saying before, that we're too weak in standing up for ourselves, and we're not willing to sacrifice everything, in a sense, for our belief and who we are, and what, you know, we're supposed to be heading towards, and which is really the truth in the world, and they are willing to stand up, and even if it's for all lies, and you know, they're showing bravery, and we're not.
Very nice. In other words, who are we being attacked by? We're being attacked by the only other people in the world that believe in the exact same concept of God that we do. They're the only other true monotheists in the world. They're our cousins, right? Christians have a bit of a, you know, distorted understanding of God. Buddhists, Hindus, there's a lot of religions that have a lot of weird understandings of God. The Muslims are the monotheists that are supposed to be our cousins, right? Abraham had 2 kids. He taught them both about monotheism, Isaac and Ishmael. They're our brothers in a sense, and they're the ones attacking us. And what are they attacking us in? In the name of God. That's exactly what the attack is. They take God seriously. I mean, you see it. You know, any 13-year-old kid in Israel, 13-year-old Palestinian, Arab, who is willing to take a knife from his kitchen and walk to Damascus Gate and try and stab a soldier, I mean, he knows he's going to get shot. I don't think there's been one terrorist yet in this whole last wave. I don't think there's been one terrorist yet that got away with it. They all get killed or captured or whatever. Nobody gets away free. They know they're going to die for it. They know they're going to get tortured or jailed. They know it's not an easy prospect. They know that they're sacrificing a lot, maybe everything. So why are they doing it? Because they really believe they're right. And maybe the mida keneged mida, maybe the measure for measure is us asking ourselves that question. Do we believe we're right as much as they believe they're right? Are we willing to take our beliefs as seriously and as passionately as they're willing to take their beliefs? We're not dying because of their ideology. We're dying because of their passion for their ideology. They really believe they're right. If you've ever been on the streets of Jerusalem, I see this all the time. You walk through Machane Yehuda, you walk through the Shuk some afternoon, and you see an Arab guy who's selling his tomatoes, and all of a sudden it's time for prayers, right? He's got to do his davening. So what do? Like literally in the middle of the Shuk, take out a piece of cardboard, get on their hands and knees, and just start praying. They don't care who's looking. They don't care who's thinking. They don't care. Like, I'm praying to God. I don't care what anybody else thinks. They really have a clarity and a passion and a conviction that says, we believe we're right. We're going to win this one. And the question for us, for Israeli soldiers, for Israeli society, for the Jewish world, do we have the same passion and clarity about what we believe in, the same way they do on their side?
I agree with you, except one change. I think their passion is not about God. I don't think they're monotheistic. I think they are idol worshippers. Their passion is for evil. That's why it's so easy for a 13-year-old child to kill themselves, because their passion is the most psychologically barbaric, primitive level of humankind. Nevertheless, they have a passion for evil. So the question for us is, I think, do we have a passion for righteousness, which includes a willingness to fight for our land and have courage to stand up and say the truth?
Very good. Okay, so I don't think we're disagreeing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing it in the name of God, whether they remain or not, or it's just an excuse. The point is, they're very committed to their ideology.
Are we committed?
In a way that, I'll give you a good example. In the last war, the last invasion, we went into Gaza a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So I met an Israeli field commander. Whenever I was having lunch with a few people, he was there. And he was on his way to Gaza. He was going down the next day with his troops. They were going to come into Gaza during the war. So I asked him, I said, you must be very scared. I mean, you're facing a very hostile enemy of millions of Palestinians. Like, how are you going to face it? How do you feel about it? He said, we Israelis, we soldiers go in high spirits, proud of ourselves, courageous. We know we're going to win. I said, that's wonderful. How do you get your troops so passionate and so excited about going in to fight the enemy? He says, we go into Gaza singing a song, and we all sing it in unity. I said, that's beautiful. What's the song? So I don't remember how the tune goes, but the song was, one second. The song was, Kochenu hu lo sinat oivenu, ela ahavat admatenu. He says, our power is not that we hate our enemy. Our power is that we love our land. It's not about hating the enemy, it's about loving the land. And it's beautiful. What do you love about the land? He says, are you kidding? I love this land. The beaches are beautiful, the bars, the discos, the clubs, the mountains, the river. It's just a nice, beautiful country. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what you're fighting for? You're fighting an enemy who's willing to die in the name of God and blow themselves up. And you think it's about protecting your clubs and your bars and your beaches? How are you going to win that one? What are we really what are we doing in this country? What are we fighting for? Is it about bars and beaches? Is it about having a nice open society so we can be like everybody else in the world? Or do we have some deeper purpose? When the rabbis in the Talmud say, you want to be saved from the birth pangs of Mashiach, learn Torah. So I think maybe learning Torah means we have to understand that Torah is the basis of who we are as a people. I'll show you one interesting quote that I think says it quite nicely. Read the following and tell me who you think said these lines. Ever since I came to the land, I was shaped by the Torah. Since only here can I begin to fully grasp its rich depth. It's influenced me more than any other book. Without knowing Torah, we cannot have self-understanding and understanding of our origin, our spirit, our life mission. Torah is the source and essence of Judaism as a faith and as a nation, the book of books that gave the people of all of Israel, the rest of humanity, profound human values, camaraderie, justice, law, truth, compassion, equality. He quotes Isaiah, I, Hashem, have called you with justice. I will hold your hand. I will protect you and set you as a covenant to the people, a light unto the nations, an or lagoyim. What do you think said these lines, right? This is what it's all about. It's Torah, it's the land, it's who we are as a people, it's being a light unto the nations, it's the moral values that we stand for, justice, peace, compassion, equality. Sounds pretty religious. Who do you think said this? Anybody want to take a guess? I'll give you a hint, huh? It's somebody Jewish. It happens to be somebody who was quite anti-religious. A fellow by the name David Ben Gurion. Anti-religious, head of a left-wing anti-religious party, right? And he totally gets it. Again, it's not about Shabbat, it's not kosher, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, what's the Jewish people all about? What's being in this land all about? It's not about just being a country and having bars and discos like every other country in the world. We stand for something. We're supposed to be standing for something. We're supposed to be living for something. We have a purpose. The Arabs have this national mission to bring jihad to the world. We also have a national mission. It's called bringing light to the world. We're supposed to be an Or Lagoyim. So again, Abraham has 2 kids. They're both battling for who's going to carry out the mission. They call it jihad. We call it Or Lagoyim or Kiddush Hashem or bringing goodness to the world, being a light to the nations. We're both battling that out. It seems to be that the Arabs right now are so much more clear on their mission, on their global mission, on their national mission, than we are on ours. And if we had it, and maybe that's all we need to have, to reach a point of saying, on a moral level, we can fight them and beat them because we know we're right. We know that our version of what the world should look like is what the world really should look like. Their world of the beheadings and the terror and the horror and the subjugation is not the way the world is supposed to look. Who's going to win this battle? It's a question of who has more clarity to fight it out, knowing that they're right. Yeah?
I think your soldier may want to express what Ben Gurion was expressing. It's just not cool to say it's the land of my people. It was a land given to my people. The other side, so we say, are not ashamed to show their devotion.
Right, but I think that's part of the actual problem. For us, it's a little...
Aberrated though they may be, they are devout.
Yeah.
That's why they're succeeding, and that's the mirror that we should be looking at.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And for us, it's a little embarrassing to talk about God and light unto the nations and be compassionate, and that's our forefathers. That's what God wanted from us. We have a book of instructions. It's not so cool. 100%. Let me end with 2 last quotes. Fascinating one from Pirkei Eliezer, written 2,000 years ago, that asks, why is his name Yishmael? Yishmael, you should know the word Yishmael is a future tense word. Yishmael means God will hear. Why is his name called Yishmael? Because God will hear his nation, us, crying out to him over what Yishmael's descendants will do to us in the land in the end of days. Why is his name Yishmael? Because he's going to cause us to cry out to God. Hashem's going to hear our cry. Well, why are we crying out? Because the Arabs are attacking us, and we reach the point of saying, you know what? More Hasbara videos and more APAC conferences and more cute campaigns and more soldiers is not really the solution to the problem. This isn't a political issue. This isn't a military issue. It's a moral, spiritual issue. When we come to the realization of who's pulling the strings, when we come to the realization this is part of the script that God put us in, because we have a mission in the world, when we understand that, and we cry out and say, God, we get it. It's up to you. It's in your hands. We've got to start doing what they're doing. They are crying out to God to kill the Jews. They are crying out to God to bring jihad to the rest of the world. They really believe God's on their side. We just don't seem to have that passion on our side to take God seriously the same way that they do. And with one last point, we'll take any questions. In the Chovos HaLevavos, one of the early Jewish philosophers said, just like a little light can banish a lot of darkness, a little truth can banish a lot of falsehood. There's not a lot of us. There are hundreds of millions of Arabs, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran. They're all over the place. There's hundreds of millions of them. We're a very small group. And even among the small group called the Jews, there's a very, very small percentage of Jews that are listening, that are paying attention, that are willing to try and do something about it. You look at it and say, we are so outnumbered. But the reality is, a little bit of light can banish a lot of darkness. That if each of us in our own way said, you know what, I'm going to do something to be a little bit more passionate. I'm going to take God a little bit more seriously in my life. And for every one of us, that might look different. It might be how we treat people around us. It might be Shabbat. It might be prayer. It might be study. It might be that when I hear the news and I get scared, instead of just following more news, I'm going to take a minute and say, God, get us out of this mess. Help us. We know you're on our side. If every one of us was to say in our own way, I know that I have work to do. I know there's positive changes I can make Jewishly in my own life. My relationships in myself, my relationship with God, my relationship with myself, my relationship with my people, my family, my friends, my community. If every one of us was to say, I'm going to do my job to bring a little bit of light, a little bit more light into the world, we have a promise that that little bit of light, one candle, can make a whole room full of light. We don't have to have hundreds of millions. We aren't. We're never going to be those hundreds of millions, but we don't need to be. Because the quality of our light is that one serious flame that we light for ourselves is far more powerful than all the nonsense of all the Arabs with all the screaming that they have out there. But it means we got to take ourselves seriously and take our potential seriously. And again, every one of us in our own way, just to ask the question, what's one thing I can do to bring a little bit more of that light into my world? And if it's in my world and it starts to shed and it starts to spread a little bit, that's really the solution to our problems. We have to wake up our brothers and sisters. There's a lot of Jews out there that are lost and that have no idea. But starting point is for ourselves to take one step forward. Yeah.
You know, I don't think that the motivation of the Arabs is that pure. I think they're willing to sacrifice a lot, and they're very, let's say, brave. But first of all, those kids that are murdering Jews with knives, they're getting money for every Jew that's murdered they're getting, you know, like thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And every time their homes are demolished, they're getting like $30,000 or $50,000 to rebuild it. So a lot of times they're doing it purely for monetary reasons, as well as hate, because they're bred in their textbooks on all the horrible things about Jews, on lies. So it's not so much necessarily their love of God, but it's their hatred of Jews. And another thing is that they really didn't start claiming the land until the Jews started coming back. So part of it, it's almost like a jealousy of us.
Sure.
And it's afraid of our scenario. I think deep down, they believe in our scenario. They're afraid of our scenario of let's say, the end of times or the truth of the world. And they're so fearful of it because it's going to prove them wrong. And it's like a shaming or something like that. Mm-hmm. It almost seems like that's their passion more than a true love of God. I think they're using God as a tool to make themselves look so wonderful because they want to brand their brand to be
they'd rather make it sound religious, for sure. It makes them feel like the good guys.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like troll checker. And I mean, I think the ones that are really God-fearing some of them have sympathy for us, and they really are on our side, the few of them.
Yeah, there's definitely not a lot of them, but yeah.
There's not a lot of them, so anyway, I just had to say
No, you're right. I hear what you're saying. I'm just not sure. I really can hear it both ways.
Yeah.
You know, is it a hatred of us? Is it a love of God? Is it a belief in God? There are many sources that do seem to say that they really are rooted in a certain feeling of connection to God because they're children of Abraham the same way that we are. There is something religious. Again, this is not Nazis, this isn't Romans, this isn't Babylonians. There's a religious tone to the threat.
Yeah.
Right? That's where it's clearly where it's alcoholic, praising Allah, Allah killed the Jews. It definitely has that tone. Is it serious? Is it just an excuse? I just don't know. I can definitely hear it both ways. But either way, clearly the response on our end has to be being serious about what the message is. Yes?
You know that only 9 out of 10 Jews, 1 out of 10 Jews believes in Hashem, and the assimilation rate in North America, some places is 17%. In Peterborough, I don't know if you are aware, Peterborough, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mosque was burned out. Who took in the mosque? The shul.
Mm-hmm.
And they show in the paper all these groups in Canada, Jewish shuls and Jewish people who are sponsoring Syrians, and they think that they're doing the right thing, and then, self-hating Jews, you had all these Jews who were civil rights in the 60s, helping the blacks, but nobody's looking
Helping everybody but ourselves, right?
No, and then it's getting worse.
It's that same lack of self-esteem. It's that same feeling of I don't have to worry about me, I don't need to protect me, I don't deserve the help, but if I can help somebody else, if I can be their doormat, it'll make them feel better, and maybe people will like me if I'm nice to them. It's that same insecurity, there's no question.
Jewish grandmothers whose grandchildren marry non-Jews. And they say to them, you're doing what Hitler tried to do.
Right.
And they said, oh, Bubby, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And it's the
Old
same
stories.
thing.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
You were talking about the importance of showing kindness, right? So when Jews do help Syrian refugees, or Jews do help the Peterborough Shul, isn't that an example of how kindness is instrumentally bringing
It can be. The question of where it's coming from. In other words, I'll give you a good example. For me, the Haiti example is a little bit telling. In other words, there was a bit of an outrage, certainly within Israel, even in the religious world and the non-religious world in Israel, that we are sending tens of millions of dollars of aid to help Haitian victims of earthquakes when we have rampant poverty in Israel. 1/3 of Israeli kids live below the poverty line, and we're helping Haitians with our money that we hardly have. So to me, it's nice to be nice to everybody else, but you got to take care of your own family first. So what it means is, it's it's Jews saying, I'm willing to sacrifice what's good for my family. I want to help others because that's when it's going to get the world to like us more. I'm willing to let my own kids starve because if I do that for them, then they'll like me. So clearly it doesn't work. That's number one. And number two, I don't know if they're doing it so much out of care as much as they're doing it because they want to have the image of being caring.
Yeah.
Point. Yeah.
In the Torah, it talks many times about that God doesn't want our sacrifices. God wants us to be kind. God wants us to do what's right. So why doesn't that include caring about our land? And God doesn't want us to be only concerned about material things. And I suggest, my rabbi said I can't talk about this in non-Jewish audiences, so I'm talking about it here. My suggestion is that we don't care enough about our land, and that's why we don't teach our children that we're not occupiers. And for people who have contact with those who are not deeply involved in Jewish religion, the Jewish kids out there won't even look at Judaism because they're ashamed that we stole the land from some poor, helpless people. So if someone was pointing a gun at the Maccabees and they said, you know what? We're not going to shoot, it's not about guns. Of course it's about guns. If you care about our land, we have to say we're not cruel occupiers. But then if we say that, then we may have to fight for our land and sacrifice for it. And we don't want to do that because we'd rather have Kiddush here and have big homes.
I agree. I'll tell you this. I'm at Aish in Jerusalem, and we bring over a lot of groups of students for Hasbara programs. Because there's no question that a big source of Jews being embarrassed about their Judaism is they're embarrassed about an occupying force with these poor Palestinians. And that's the headlines, and people put away their Magen David, they take off their kippahs, they don't go to Israel programs, they don't want to be known as Jewish because of what Jews in Israel are doing. So getting Jews to hear Israel's side of the story, to realize that we're not the bad guys, we're not a Nazi occupying oppressive force, for sure it helps with Jewish education and it makes Jews feel better about Judaism. But my challenge with every Hasbara group is exactly this question, just the basic question. Why do we need a state of Israel altogether? We're causing so much problem. The world hates us. All the sacrifice, all the lives, our economy's in ruin. Let's just pack up and leave. Let's go to Australia. Australia's a pretty nice place. Nobody hurting us in Australia. And it's very hard for a Jewish student who's not rooted in Torah to give an articulate answer why the Jewish people need to have a land. Other than this, the soldier, we have our own land, we have our own discos, we can do it in Hebrew and pick up Israeli girls. It's nicer to do it with Jews than with non-Jews. We have our own social, we can be free people in our own land. It's nice. It's not a compelling reason to fight for a land and be willing to sacrifice for it. If there's no deeper Jewish reason of why we need a Jewish state, it's hard to convince people to sacrifice for a Jewish state. So the education I want to give people when I teach them is there's a Jewish reason to have a Jewish state, not just a nationalistic reason to have a Jewish state. If you have both together, that's already the beginning of people seeing God's hand in history and where we're really at.